In episode 0, I talked about how focus, accountability, and how perspective forms over time. This episode is about where that perspective started to take shape. So, long before the titles or decisions, the environment was already doing its work. This is episode 1, Environment Leaves a Mark. Let's get into it. Every mission has a beginning, and every journey has a purpose. This is Zeroed In. All right, I'm Rick Kelly, and this is Zeroed In. So before I get into this, one thing's worth saying. This episode isn't polished or compressed. It's told the way my memory actually works. So Marshfield is where this story starts. So my earliest memory is probably when I was about 5 years old. We used to take family trips to Ontario, Canada, to see family. I come from a very large family, on my father's side mainly, and everyone rented RVs or drove their own vehicles to my great uncle's house up there. So I remember one night my family had built a fire for everyone to sit around and tell stories. So while I was sitting there in a chair by the fire, two of my cousins who lived up there in Ontario, they decided it would be funny if they'd get on each other's shoulders, drape like a sheet or a blanket over them to represent like some kind of ghostly figure, and then scare kids by the fire. When I saw them, I was so scared that I ran directly through the flames, like through the hot coals and the flames in the fire, just in the opposite direction to get away. That moment stuck with me for most of my childhood. So during those early years in Marshfield, I often found myself in physical altercations with a few of the neighborhood kids. It always seemed nightly that I was in fistfights with someone. There was one kid in particular who always pushed my buttons and wanted to fight for no reason at all. I remember one evening after one of our fights, the kid's dad told me he wanted to speak with me. So I went into his house and he sat at the kitchen table and holding what may have been what I thought might have been a steak knife in his hand. He told me that if I laid another hand on his son, he'd cut my fingers off with that knife so I could never make a fist again. He also told me not to mention that conversation to my parents. So I can't remember if we ever fought again, but I can say that I have all my fingers to this day. So besides always being in fights, we would always take our adventures to what nowadays would probably be, I don't know, called extreme level. But back then it was the norm. We'd love to make ramps with whatever wood we found and use them as jumps, jump over items or people. So we'd lay items at the end of the ramp, or people would lay at the end of the ramp, and then pretend like we're living the life of Evel Knievel. Because if back then Evel Knievel was pretty big, so if we weren't using ramps, we would just try to like bunny hop, like lift the bike as we were moving forward over each other. Sometimes it would work. Other times we'd just run the other kid over or land on him altogether. It made for some great scrapes, bruises, and probably some crying sessions as well. So there was a road back then in Marshfield called Grasshopper Lane. It had a huge hill on it, and at least to us it was huge at the time. So we would take our bikes and sometimes skateboards and see how fast and how far we could go with only using our feet to control the handlebars. This was a contest of sorts to see who was daring enough to go furthest without either falling off or getting really jacked up or putting their feet back down on the pedals to stop themselves before running into the traffic in the cross street at the end of the road at the bottom of the hill. So if you're coming down the hill, it was a cross street. So to think that we didn't have any control of the bike. So it was more of a dare thing to where who's going to kind of, wuss out first. So when I was in second grade, I went over to my cousin's house, and one of my cousins had a 3-speed bike with a banana seat and all. I think it was green. I'm not sure, but it was ugly. And we made a ramp out of some old wood we found and placed some items beyond the ramp to see if we could clear them, on the jump. So this was normal. I mean, this was a normal concrete road that we were doing this on. And back then, you weren't wearing helmets either. So all I remember was trying to get up enough speed to hit the ramp and to see how far I could jump. The next thing I remember, I was waking up in the hospital with a fractured skull, 3/4 of the way around my head. Um, it's a good thing the Lord doesn't allow us to remember certain traumatic events throughout our lives. This definitely wouldn't be my last time either. So um, we used to ride bikes all over, like sometimes a couple of miles away from the house. Now, mind you, I just told you this is Marshfield, right? So I lived there from a newborn till when I was 9. So this is probably in the 5 to 9 range that we would do all this. So um, you know this was not unheard of during those times. As far as just traveling away from the house that far on your bike. So we just knew that we had to be in before the street lights came on. So I remember when I got my first bike. I think it might have been a Huffy or something like that. And I think I couldn't reach the pedals because I I'm not a tall guy. I was a little short kid growing up, and my dad had cut wooden blocks from 2x4s and taped them on both sides of the pedals just so I could reach them. So I think the seat was fixed. It was like a fixed seat, but um, we couldn't we couldn't lower the seat. So the other option we'll do, we'll just put wooden 2x4s on the 2x4 blocks on the pedals. So another crazy thing we like to do, we used to make like mortar type devices using a tennis ball can. So we'd cut a small hole into the sides of the bottom of the can, use some SO chain oil, would squirt like a liberal amount of oil like into the bottom of the can, drop a tennis ball inside, and then use a lighter or matches to light the oil through the small hole in the can. The pressure at that time, the pressure would just build up, and eventually the tennis ball would just shoot out of the can into the air. I mean, we'd just try to see, how high it would go. So eventually we got tired of seeing, how high we could make it go. So we decided it would just be fun, you know, to make a couple of them instead of just keeping the one and we all share. So we made a couple of them and used them as cannons to shoot each other. So those are pretty fun days, pretty resourceful too. So my first paying job was a paper route. So where I deliver the Patriot Ledger newspaper to people's houses using my bike. So the newspaper truck, they deliver a stack of papers at the end of the driveway, tied in a bundle with a piece of string or whatever. I had a bag that I strapped over my handlebars and put the papers into. So once a week, I'd collect money from the houses I'd deliver and put the money in an envelope, then leave it in the mailbox for the newspaper courier to collect. I think I only made like cents on the dollar. But in those days, being like 7 or 8 years old, that was car model buying cash. I was totally into buying like, the car models where you put the glue and, piece them all together and you make like these really cool model cars. So as a kid, that's what I liked doing. I used to like going to the store and buying those model cars and putting them together. So it's a pretty cool hobby without, shooting cannons off at each other. So those early years, I went to a school called Daniel Webster. Those who are listening and went during that time, they'll understand. So those are fun. I was a good student academically, but somewhat of a terror behavior-wise. Always found myself in trouble for doing something stupid. I remember there was a girl I had a crush on, and one day I finally worked up the nerve to run up to her at recess and give her a kiss on the cheek, then ran away. I felt nervous, excited, and embarrassed like all at once. I think I was in 4th grade, and that was right before we moved to Pembroke. So we moved to Pembroke at 9. I was 9 years old, and I was there till I was 18. So We moved to Pembroke. I think it was in October of '81. Um, this was a significant change as I didn't know anyone either in school or the neighborhood. Although, like I said, I come from a large family, so my cousins that I fractured my skull with, back in, we all lived in Marshfield at one point, but we all ended up moving too. So those cousins, they moved there a little bit earlier than we did, and they lived a few streets over, and they did go to the same school as us, so that was good. There was another kid from Marshfield that I remember who had also moved and ended up a few houses down from us in the neighborhood. So I wasn't completely lost without hope, but that same day we moved in, some kids from the neighborhood, they came by to the house, probably out of curiosity, to meet us. And it was nice to see faces of kids the same age and grade as me. So I should have said it at the beginning, but I grew up in a middle class, very conservative Irish Catholic household. Even the neighborhood we moved into in Pembroke was predominantly that way. My family went to church every Sunday. We never missed a mass. This is probably due to my father's side of the family, where I believe they still attended mass when the sermons were still in Latin. So I would later become an altar boy a couple of years in junior high school. That's a total stark difference from the kid who was a wild child just a few years earlier. So um, when I first attended Hobbamock Elementary, so now this is like me transitioning from Daniel Webster and Marshfield. Now in Pembroke, I went to Hobbamock. So I didn't know anybody in the class. Trying to make friends at 9, it's a challenge. So especially when I was a new kid. However, one thing I noticed is that my brazen ways of juvenile mischief kind of took a turn, probably for the better. So I didn't act as I did during my time in Marshfield, at least for the most part. But, or at least with the kids at school anyway. With my brother, it's a different story, but it was probably just a change in the environment. So baseball, wow, baseball was a passion of mine. I love playing. I started in Marshfield when I was 5 or 6 and stayed with it all the way through I was 18 years old. As soon as we arrived in Pembroke, I signed up for the town league, a tradition I maintained every season until I was too old to play at their level of leagues. Because once you hit high school, you weren't playing in the town league anymore. I was a decent athlete as a kid, but I seemed to excel more at baseball than other sports. I dreamed that one day, I'd play for the Boston Red Sox in Fenway Park and, have my family there and everything. I played a lot of hockey growing up as well, but mainly pickup type on the frozen ponds or the cranberry bogs. From where I'm at, or from where I grew up at, there was a lot of cranberry bogs. So, if you drink cranberry juice from Ocean Spray, I probably skated on those bogs before. So, in the winter, so we would just shovel the snow off the ice to create like the size of a small rink, and everybody would throw in their hockey sticks in the middle, and then one person would toss the sticks like to either end of the ice, and whichever side end your stick landed on, that was the team you're on. So, and then early in the spring, there'd be tryouts for baseball. So after tryouts, we'd have to wait, to find out what team we're on. There was a fairly large group of us who played every year, and for the most part, many of us had a consistent level of talent. Some guys were born to play certain positions. Others, like me, were kind of more like a jack of all trades type player, meaning like we'd interchange positions throughout our tenure in town leagues. Some played catcher their entire time, even through high school. I played third base, shortstop, left field, center field at times. I tried pitching, but that didn't last too long, as I found myself hitting a lot of batters. So, the coach would always say, "Hey, throw him the funny one." And next thing you know, I'm like hitting somebody and now they're taking their base. So, nevertheless, I gave 100% and took the game pretty seriously, even as a kid. As I started growing, so did my talents. So I was pretty fast on my feet and had a pretty good arm, just not for pitching anyway. So in high school, there were 3 levels of play: freshman ball, junior varsity, and varsity. And I recall our first tryouts as a freshman. I was playing like a lot of outfield at the time due to my speed and my arm strength. The coach was working with us in the outfield by using a fungo bat. So those who played before, they understand like a fungo bat. It makes the ball go further. So it's typically used for hitting fly balls and stuff like that. So the coach was using it to hit long fly balls to us. And each person had rotated as the coach evaluated like each individual. The intent of the drill was for us outfielders to just get the ball and hit the cutoff man so we could pick off the runner who was shooting for home. And it was my turn, and the coach hit the ball so hard that it just soared over my head. And we didn't have a fence in the outfield, so I mean, I was like chasing it. I was chasing that thing down. So when I grabbed hold of the ball, I noticed that if I had hit the cutoff man, the runner probably would have made it home, just because of that slight delay. So I decided to say, the hell with it. I'll just not hit the cutoff man and try to cut the runner down myself at home. So when I released the ball toward home plate, I noticed like it was going, like it was on a trajectory towards home. However, I kind of overestimated my power, and the ball sailed like over everything, including the backstop and the plate and the coach. And as a matter of fact, as that was happening, the varsity team was walking by. They were walking around our field, like past the backstop, en route to their field. Luckily, I didn't hit anybody in that group. But the most notable aspect of what happened and what took place after the tryouts, when we were returning to the locker room, the freshman coach informed me that the varsity coach wanted to speak with me. So the varsity coach told me that he wanted me to practice with his team from that point on, since he saw a lot of potential in my ability, which I thought was really cool. Although I didn't make the full-time varsity team my freshman year, I earned a spot on the JV team for the rest of that season. And I kind of played up and down between freshman and JV. In my sophomore year of high school baseball, I spent a lot of time on the JV team, but I was called up to play in some varsity games. That was pretty exciting. I got to see how the game evolved, including its speed and the accuracy of play. I played full-time with the varsity team during my junior and senior years. And one of those years, I led the league in stolen bases. I had a pretty good eye for pitchers and their movements on the mound, and I would just take full advantage of that with my speed. So I was typically in the top, either the leadoff or the second hitter in the lineup. So the coach needed me to get on base. I wasn't too bad in the outfield either. There are quite a few players on the opposite teams that I had, like the term gunned down, as they tried to take like an extra base on me. So I was, to put this into perspective, I was like this scrawny 135-pound kid at the time, skin and bones basically. So, but I had enough strength to be effective from distance. So I think I finished both of those seasons with like a batting average of like just over 300. So anyway, enough of the Al Bundy stories. So I think baseball was the first place where effort was translated cleanly into results. So that mattered more than I actually realized at the time. So growing up in Pembroke, it was fun, but it was also a time of challenges. So I enjoyed playing as a kid. I enjoyed playing wiffle ball with the kids in the neighborhood, as well as the long days of football games with the neighbors' yards, the long nights of playing kick the can amongst other games, at the Sullivan House. If they're listening, they'll remember those days too. It was fun, but death. So death arrived before I had a language for it. It didn't teach lessons. It just kind of removed illusions. Kind of like, the thought of being invincible as a kid. So one of my friends, he was killed while riding his bike. I can't remember all the details, but I recall like not understanding why it happened and how I would never see him again. Um, Although we didn't live in the same neighborhood, he was a friend who I had met at many of the dances that we attended. So before you laugh, these dances, they weren't the type that boys and girls would go and actually dance with each other per se. Break dancing was big during that time. Both schools and churches, they would host these dances as a place to hang out for kids. So it was pretty fun. He was awesome at breakdancing, and he became popular with a lot of the kids. So, not to mention, he was just a genuinely good person. He was truly missed. So, um, my academics in Hubbamock Elementary and Pembroke, they were pretty good, as I was mainly like an A/B student. However, when I got to junior high, things changed significantly. Our junior high school consisted of seventh and eighth grade. And additionally, I attended the district of Silver Lake, which comprised of approximately 4 towns. So this is where being a preteen and a young teenager really got me into trouble. So academically and socially, as with probably a lot of kids during this time. This is a moment in time when I truly felt independent, thanks to our ability to move from classroom to classroom each day, rather than just sitting in the same, you know, same space for 8 hours a day, as we did in elementary school. Um, like I said, academically, I struggled. I was good in elementary, but academically in junior high, like I struggled big time. I saw my first F's on my report cards. I hated reading, but I excelled at spelling and grammatical concepts. Who'd have thought? So, math was my downfall. Definitely not my strong suit. If it wasn't standard like addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division, forget about it. I knew I was going to fail. I just didn't understand it. I just couldn't get it. So this is almost a moment in time where I tried to find out where I fit in as well. So I never truly felt that I fit in anywhere or with any group. Um, when you're in elementary school, for the most part, like you hang with the same core group of kids each day. In junior high, like um, everyone is now meeting, new people for the first time, and each town's like representation of kids is already established, like their own cliques. So plus the style trends of the '80s, they were crazy. So if you grew up in the '80s, you know what I'm talking about. If not, go and watch MTV. Watch the '80s videos. So from cuffing at the bottom of the pants to wearing silk ties and designer clothing, it was hard to keep up with, especially amongst like the normal stressors that young teens and teenagers go through during puberty at that time. So what was once a norm in elementary school was now like abnormal and weird in junior high school. So we had to grow up fast. Seventh grade is where I learned that kissing wasn't just a peck on the lips. There was another girl. There was a girl in seventh grade that I actually had a crush on, and I asked her out. And what's funny about that statement is that I had no idea what going out meant at the time. So it just seemed to be as simple as boyfriend, girlfriend. So didn't know. So she was from another town. So it wasn't like we're going to see each other much outside of school. And I remember we were in the hallway talking between classes one day when all of a sudden she leaned in and kissed me on the mouth and then proceeded to like follow that up with like shoving her tongue down halfway down my throat. So at that moment, it was like the weirdest and like coolest thing like I had ever experienced in my young life. Definitely better than visiting Niagara Falls. So, and I did go visit them when I was a kid. So I can definitely compare that. So it was definitely cooler. I don't think I have too many memories from junior high though, that would be like considered like out of the norm. However, high school, that was a different animal. High school was about survival, finding out where the parties were on the weekend, playing sports. At least it was for me. Survival in the sense of academics, social status, and wondering where life just might take you next. It's funny. At one point, there's there were quite a few of us from the same family going to high school at the same time. So I had older cousins. They were in their senior year. I had two more in their sophomore year, and two of us were the same age in our freshman year. So, remember, junior high, it was like a melting pot of kids from different towns in the district. So, but high school, it returned back to a single town scenario with only students from the town that I grew up in, Pembroke. They attended the Pembroke campus. So everyone else outside of Pembroke attended the Kingston campus, unless like you were going to do a trade. So the Kingston campus of the Silver Lake, like I said, there were two main campuses, but the Kingston campus, they had like all the trades, like the wood shops and mechanics and everything else. So if you want to go do that, you could go to Kingston. But for the most part, everybody went back to Pembroke. So those of us from Pembroke. So many of the friendships that we formed with those in junior high, those largely dissipated once we all entered high school, unless we saw, each other at a weekend party or some kind of gathering. So really the only ones that remained for me were the ones that played baseball. I was able to keep up with them during baseball season. So when it came to fitting in, just like in junior high, I never really felt like I fit in there either. This includes like all 4 years of high school. Sure, I had friends, but I had no idea like who I was or what I really wanted. I always just felt like an outsider. I don't remember much from my freshman year, except that it was new and our high school had 4 floors. And during that time, it seemed pretty immense. I mean, it seemed pretty huge, especially coming from, just a single story, elementary school, and then like a 1.5 story middle school. So, so trying to get to class on time. I had one on the first floor, and the next was like on the 3rd floor, on the opposite side of the building. So that was kind of a chore to get to. And although I'm probably my own worst enemy a lot. I never carried more than one book throughout the day, so I'd always have to like stop by my locker between classes and then shoot the breeze with like anyone I knew who was around there. Figures, I mean, I wasn't there for the academics anyway, so might as well just try to socialize. My sophomore year, it improved in one aspect, but declined in another. So during baseball season, I met a girl who kept the team's baseball stats, the scorebook actually, and we hit it off and we became an item throughout the first half of my senior year. But during that time, like I neglected my close friends. I didn't realize at the time how much they needed to be in my life, but by the time I figured it out, like I started socializing so much that my grades just started to tank. That's when I lost my freedom just to come and go until my grades improved. Yeah, I was grounded a lot in high school due to grades. So it wasn't doing like the stupid stuff like firing cannons at each other anymore. It was academics. I didn't make the best choices though either. So I remember when the movie Major League came out, everybody who played baseball at the time wanted to be like Rick Vaughn, the character that Charlie Sheen played. He had this lightning bolt thing going on in the back of his hair, on the back of his head. So I wanted to have the same style. So I went over to a friend's house and asked her if she could cut that design like into the back of my hair. God love her. I mean, she tried her best, but it didn't quite come out as it was supposed to. So it turned out more like a V shape in the back of my head. So the lightning bolt, it just didn't work. So it was more like just a straight V in the back. I came home and my dad, he was sitting downstairs watching the television. I told him I got a haircut, and he seemed to be okay about it until I started to walk back up the stairs. As I like turned my back to him, and he said something to the effect of, "What is that?" Like in like roaring manner, like some kind of roaring voice, like, "What is that?" Like, holy crap. So I hadn't fully seen the damage myself at this point because it was in the back of my head. So but I'm sure he did. So he told me to get out of the house. Like that was his first instinct. Was like he's like, get out of the house with that haircut. Then, as quickly as he told me to get out, he told me to stay inside the house, as he didn't want anyone to see like what I had done to my head. I'm not 100% sure, but I think he had my mother like call around to see if like there was a barber shop open that could fix the monstrosity that had been created. So, but there wasn't. So I went to school the next morning looking like that. Then I got a fix later on that afternoon. So that's a story that my parents, they still tell to this day. So I'm sure that was something that really stood out. Death came again. Two more times, this time in high school. Two more friends my age, they lost their lives. One to his own hand and the other to a tragic event. I won't go into details on these, but it will become a recurring theme as we move on through the later episodes. So during my senior year, I watched as kids applied to and received acceptance letters from colleges that they had applied to. I had zero intentions of going to college. I hated academics so much in high school that I had absolutely no desire to attend. All I wanted to do was play baseball. I worked at a bar and lounge that served pizzas, burgers, and other small items, bar food basically. And I was a cook, and it wasn't the best job, but it gave me a little bit of money in my pocket. I wasn't thinking forward. I wasn't focused on what I might do for a career, job path wise. There was a kid who was a couple years older than me, and we shared like the same passion for baseball. He played in the Cape Cod League. It's a Quad A, so those are familiar with kind of like the post, high school and like almost like collegiate level, but in like the minor league. So there was a Quad A and style league. It develops players like to move on to higher rated baseball leagues, which like turn into that lead into Major League Baseball. So I talked with him about it, and he convinced me to come down and play during the summer. So after I graduated high school. So I went down, I played in a few games, but I didn't get much playing time. I was still on the smaller size of the scale, when it came to the size of the players they were looking for. Although I was fast and had a good hand-eye coordination, my size at 135 pounds just kind of did me in. I just wasn't, I had the talent, but I was just so small compared to everybody else that's trying to shoot out for those leagues. So that was a dream, like short-lived, quickly. So that entire summer of 1990, I spent almost all my time with my friends before they left for college. I had a 1986 red Pontiac Fiero. It had a removable sunroof. The car, it's designed for only two people, the driver and the passenger. So think of like Corvette style, right? Just no back seat, just, well, some Corvettes have back seats, but this one, it was just like a coupe style, two seats, that's it. However, that summer, like we managed to cram like 4 or 5 of us in there as we went to the beach or other places. Those are pretty good times. So I know those who are listening, and you were with me during that time, you definitely remember that. So throughout the summer, military recruiters, they just continued calling the house, seeking to recruit me to their ranks, every branch of service. Every time they called and identified themselves, I would just tell them absolutely not and hang up the phone. I hated the thought of authority at that point in my life. At that time, I felt like I had just lived under a rule of authority for the last 18 years, and there was no way I was going to lose out on any more personal freedom. Hell, I spent a lot of time grounded in high school, so I was like, no more of this. I had no idea what I was going to do, though, with my life. But it definitely wasn't joining the military at that time. So at the end of the summer, and at the beginning of the fall, I watched as my friends just headed off to college. I was still working at the same place, making the same burgers and pizzas as I did in high school. When I had time on the weekends, though, I'd go and visit my friends at their colleges, attend the parties. So that was pretty cool. But then, I was given options by my parents, kind of like a lot of people do. You know, options are go to college or, move out, get an apartment, get a job, and or stay here and get a job and pay rent. I mean, basically that was it. Like I said, I didn't have any. I didn't think I had any purpose whatsoever. So well, I knew college was out of the question. I'm sure, I sure didn't make enough money at my current job to move out and get an apartment somewhere. That bar job, was not paying really anything. So a friend and I, we went into Boston, into the city one day, and we filed for civil service. I had no idea, why I did that at the time, except that I knew I was supposed to when I turned 18. I still had no idea what I wanted to do, even after filing for civil service. So it seemed like I was out of options and I had no direction whatsoever. So, as much as I hated the thought of joining the military, I remembered a conversation I had with another friend of mine about his uncle being an Army Ranger. I had no idea what that was. So, one day I decided, I'm just going to venture on down to the Army recruiting office in Plymouth. I figured it probably wouldn't hurt just to see what they had to offer, as I didn't know anything about the Army at all. I walked in and the recruiter asked me some standard questions, including, what my career interests were. I told him I didn't know the first thing about the Army, except that a friend told me something about Army Rangers. So back then, there were like DVD style type discs called laser discs. So think of a small DVD, and then it was like the laser disc was like the size of I think it was either the same size of like a record, like not a 45, but like an LP, and or either that or a little bit bigger. But either way, it was a big disc, right? And he put that into the video player, and in the video, it consisted of various jobs within the infantry. So since I told him, Army Ranger stuff, it's going to be infantry. So he started showing me this disc that had all these jobs on there. So one video had a soldier firing rockets like out of a tube, which were like mortars, similar to what like I was doing as a kid with the tennis ball can, like as we were like dropping the ball in there and, lighting the oil at the bottom, letting the pressure go. But mortars, they were obviously a little bit more dangerous. So one video had soldiers firing rockets from a wheeled vehicle, and those were like 11 hotels at the time, which they don't exist today. Another one had soldiers moving through the woods in a tank, and back then they were called 11 mics. 11 was the military occupational specialty of the MOS. The 11 series was the infantry. So, but each piece had like their own specialty. So, the last video that he showed had soldiers jumping out of airplanes, and then once they hit the ground, they went running through the woods shooting M16s, and those were 11 Bravos. So I was like, that video also represented 75th Ranger Regiment. I was hooked. I was like, that was so cool, yet so far from anything I thought I'd get myself into. I immediately told the recruiter, I'm like, dude, sign me up. So within a few visits to the house, to sign paperwork, and then one day at MEPS, which Military Entrance Processing Station, I believe, in Boston. I went to the one in Boston. And next thing I knew, I was landing in Columbus, Georgia, to attend infantry basic training at Fort Benning. So looking back, like none of this feels random. Different environments, they pulled different traits out of me, some useful, some were pretty costly. I didn't recognize the pattern while I was still living it. So I just knew that with the way my life was shaping out, I needed structure. So I didn't yet understand like what that structure would demand in return, but I was about to find out. So until the next episode, stay aware, stay accountable, stay zeroed in.